I'm Rob Sarney, and you're listening to What the Heck FinTech, where you'll experience and learn that FinTech is Fin Life. Let's get started. Okay, everybody, we have a great episode. I think we have our best storyteller that we've ever had on here. Wait till you hear Rich. So, Rich, I'm going to make sure I say his name right, because we just kind of Rich Napolitano. And with Napolitano, I thought I got to put the accent in there or something, right? Because you were trying to coach me up a little bit, right, a few minutes ago. And so Rich has done so much. I mean, he's been an entrepreneur, a startup, a founder, big IT executive. He's a coach, a mentor. He says he's retired, but we'll get into that. Is he really retired? I mean, I'm retired. I don't know. Am I retired? So we'll talk about that kind of stuff too, because there's a fire in Rich that you don't see from a lot of people. So Rich, you've done so many unbelievable things. How about walk us through a little bit, and I'll ask some questions, because I've heard a couple of your stories before, but I know I'm going to hear new stories. That's what I love about this podcast right now. How do you grow up? And I know you've been so many places now, and you got into the fintech space, right? But I'm sure it wasn't a fintech focus at first. So I'll let you take it away, Rich. You tell your story.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm an engineer, and that you never lose that. Once an engineer, always an engineer. And so you're kind of born an engineer. So I have 3 kids, and one of them is clearly an engineer, and 2 of them are not. And I would also say that my wife is an engineer as well. So we thought we'd have more engineers, but it worked out pretty good as it was. So I grew up in New York, and State University, and started my first company in college, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But I came up here in 1983, and I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation, first in advanced development. And then in the VMS operating system group for a long time, building a lot of cool things. I left in the late 80s. Digital was getting weird. Unix was emerging. And I went to my first startup. We pretty rapidly sold that to Adobe in 1989. And then most of the team moved to the West Coast. I had no desire to do that. Go to New England. And so I ran a consulting software business, building operating system components, and I had an idea on my lawnmower, and I founded a company called Data Kinesis. We sold that to Adaptech. I stayed there a couple of years, invested in a bunch of companies. One of them was a company called Pyrus Networks in Littleton, Mass. We ended up selling that to Sun Microsystems. They built a storage networking device. I ran sales at Sun. I was there for 2 years. Scott McNeely, the founder, asked me to take over sales. I ran US sales for Sun. They hadn't grown in 5 years, and we got them growing. I left after a year or two as McNeely stepped down from CEO. I went to the beach. Another time I retired, failed. And then Joe Tucci from EMC, who called me up, and he was restructuring the company a little bit. His successor needed somebody to help him scale, so that anyway, I ended up staying at EMC. I never thought I'd do that for like 10 years, ran about 30 EMC. And then as Tucci was retiring, I went back into the startup world, a company called Plexi, which built software-defined networking infrastructure. And we sold that to HP. And then I was thinking about ideas for some software companies, and I bumped into a spin-out from Commonwealth, which was my foray into fintech. And so that was a company called Advisor 360, which built wealth management software, which I retired from. And I am retired, which means not operating anything to me.
Okay, that's a good definition. I like that. Define operating. Define operating.
Running something.
Running it, being the head person, running it.
So I would say that metaphorically, the metaphor I use is, I don't want to have any more children. I only want grandchildren, because I want all the problems to go home with someone else at night. That's how I define retirement.
I like that.
So I'm happy to be an uncle. I'm happy to be an uncle. I'm happy to be a grandfather. Mom and dad, I'm out of that business.
Wow. I mean, you just hit so many things. I couldn't keep up with you. It was so many. So I'm going to start with some more high level type questions. So, you with companies, you started companies, you sold them. Like, what's the common thread over all of that? A lot of tech because you're an engineer. I want to talk about that too in a little bit.
Right.
And obviously, you had I have a brother-in-law that teaches at our Clarkson, and he actually does aerospace. And he used
Mm.
to say it about my son, "Oh, he's got the knack." He said he said it's the knack because you have that different curiosity. Take things apart, put them together, understand them. So you had the knack. I'd like to hear a little bit about that too. Like, did you realize you had the knack, or have you ever heard that term before?
Yeah, so I mean, you've heard this story before. So I started my first company when I was in college, and I was working in the computing center. That's when you remember this, when we went to the computing center, the computer was smaller than this in capacity, right?
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
was many
capacity.
rooms. Yeah, and the compute and everything else. And so there were very big lines in the computing center because we everything was key punch. So you would type on cards and which was, you remember this was horrific. And in fact, my job at the computing center, one of the jobs was you'd hand me your deck and then I'd run it through the remote job entry machine and hand you back your listing. But that was horrific. But we had a few terminals just at the time. We had four of them. So the lines, it was just easier to develop your software doing that. And so the lines were really huge. And one day I came in and I'm like, this is horrible. And my roommate was an electrical engineer, and he had this flyer for this computer. It was called the Commodore PET. And I knew its architecture, and it had a GPIB bus on the back of it. And his name is Doug 𝐢𝐳𝐡, a great engineer.
Hmm.
Uh, and I said, can you connect this Commodore PET to an RS-232 line? Because if you can, we can become a distributor for then Hayes modems. And I can write a terminal emulation program, and we can work from our dorm rooms and never go to the computing center. And he's like, what did you say? I'm like, if you can do that, I can do this. So we built it in a few weeks. And lo and behold, and this is 1981. So in our first year, we sold like $40,000 of stuff. And uh, it worked. And so what I learned there was that if you see a problem and you can leverage technology to solve it, and you can take people's pain away, they'll give you money. And that's all I've ever done ever since. I've only really done one thing: absorb problems, use technology to solve them, sell them to people, and they give you money because you took away their pain. So that's all I've ever done. I'm 40,
Wow.
and I'm actually what I'm doing now mostly.
Now I got a little follow-up question on that story. So, I mean, I remember back in the Radio Shack days, and even when I talk about my son, right? He had what? If I am I going to say it's right? A Duino or
TRS
something?
TRS 80.
And so you could get the equipment and actually start, plugging things together and stuff.
Correct.
There's no more Radio Shack anymore. Is there places that are still out there like that for people like when you were in college to put that stuff together?
It's not really, there's not really a place anymore. There was a place outside of Boston which just closed. I forget the name of it. It was right on 128. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it just closed. Online, you can buy these things now, though,
Yeah.
and they're mostly from China. Yeah. Yeah. You can get the pieces if you want. I used to go
Wow.
to the Bowery in New York to buy components, connectors, diodes, resistors, cables. That's where you went to get it. Our electronics was started there. So there's a lot of history there.
So that's almost like so you got your hands dirty almost like with electrical engineering, like that type of stuff, right?
Well,
But
I just did the software. My partner, Doug, he was the EE.
got it. Got it. Wow. Now, what were you coding in back then?
That was it was 6502 processor, so there was low-level stuff to control the low-level piece, and then mostly of the application was written in BASIC at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was
And
6502 was the processor, and you had to do some low-level assembly stuff to communicate to the ports. There was no architectures at the time. You just built everything.
Now that must have come in handy at because you were at digital too.
So then I went to digital, and part of the reason they hired me was that I lived at the time. I lived right at this hardware and software boundary, and so we built a bunch of really interesting systems. We built the first mastering system that went from mag tape to CD-ROM, and so now everything, all music and everything, all your data was on CDs. Now it's all online. But we built that mastering system working with Philips. We built some early laser printers. It was an advanced development, but we built a lot of crazy stuff at the time. And so I was the software guy in this group of hardware guys that were building crazy stuff. It was really cool.
Well, now where were you? Were you in Woburn? Were you in Merrimack? Were you in Marlboro?
Software engineering had just been opened in Nashua, New Hampshire. So
Nashua, yep.
I moved from Brooklyn, New York to Nashua, New Hampshire.
The only reason why I know those spots, well, my father actually was a state trooper. He was in charge of security at Digital for a few years after he retired, because you had to retire so young back then. Once you did 20 years for Massachusetts State Trooper, then you're done. You're not allowed to work anymore. So he was like 47, and then he ended up working at Digital, being in charge of U.S. security.
We had so many facilities, and most of them were retired off, state troopers, and they were, by the way, all awesome guys. I may have met your dad, and I have to think about it now.
He was definitely in Woburn and Maynard. Does that sound right too? And like for his offices and Woburn. Woburn. I think it was Woburn.
Woburn. I can't remember like where the helicopters were kept, because it was all those guys were gathered. Like a lot of the support infrastructure. It might have been Woburn. I don't remember now. Anyways, we're off in the weeds.
When I was in college, I got to be a security guard there because he had the job there. When I was in college, like sitting there making sure, people check their badge, that kind of stuff, because they had all the equipment there, Sure. Wow. And I had to do my rounds. So there you go. I digress, right? So yeah, especially probably my second job closely after I worked at a company called 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐭𝐞𝐜t and did coding on VAX VMS, and it was VAX Basic. Right, so I could make a dumb terminal look pretty with all the kind of graphics and stuff, and you didn't have that was right before PCs was starting to go, and the whole GUI with that. But I did a ton of VAX Basic, and also what was it? I would have it so you'd highlight and then drill in. So I had a whole bunch of code, a lot of financial systems that way. Wow.
Yeah, on VMS, there was some really talented compiler people. So the PL1 compiler was world class. Pascal. They had their own languages. Bliss was a language we all learned. But in the operating system group, generally you developed in either VAX or Alpha. Assembly code was basically what you did. If you're in the operating system group, this is before C really came into play. We all use C. We went from Pascal to C to C++, to Ada, a minute to Ada, to Java, like that migration of operating systems evolution. But to us at the time, a language, you just picked up a manual and you just, you never thought of yourself, which is very different than now. We never thought of ourselves as programmers. We were software engineers. So the language was irrelevant to us. I say to young kids, engineers now, I've forgotten more programming language than you'll ever remember, right? And it didn't matter. People I'm a Python developer, I'm a front end. No, you're either an engineer or not. And an engineer, it doesn't matter. I know how to use a screwdriver and a hammer. And it's not all one. I don't use a hammer for everything. I don't use Python for everything. I'm doing vibe coding now with React and, IndexedDB and, I don't really care. It's the right tool for the job. So
to dovetail with that a little bit, and this is what I saw when I was at WPI, and I worked closely with computer science over there, and that's the 800-pound gorilla there. That's a big area for WPI, and used to do fintech projects with them. And I remember when I was a developer, like you knew, Power Builder, you knew Basic, you knew VB, you knew C++, right? So it was like back when I was developing, like your language was who you were. But now I think it's gone full cycle based on what you just said, is that because we used to say, whatever you're coding in, tell us what it is ahead of time, and the students will be ready for you when we start your project. And because we had Wilson Wong, who's been on this podcast, yeah, he said, yeah, it doesn't matter. They'll figure it out. So I think it's gone full circle almost to
Well,
what I'm seeing.
it should have, frankly, I think we went on a tangent where people identified their skills with a language, and
Yeah,
that was a mistake. In fact, I think they were actually too narrow.
yeah.
But now with LLMs, it really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can translate between these almost instantaneously, right? So uh, the notion of the language, but the notions of computer science and engineering discipline, those are still very, very important skills. And like
Mm.
even the thing I'm working on, which we'll talk about a little bit later, if I wasn't an engineer, if I wasn't trained in computer science, I couldn't build the application I'm building because I'm trying to process hundreds of thousands of images on a local processor at 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 significant rates, and the architecture of what I'm building is non-trivial. So it's multi-threaded. I mean, it uses GPUs. I mean, if you don't understand how these things work, and so, but I'm not involved. Like I could care if it's Python or React or whatever, C++, Java underneath it, whatever makes sense for that. But the basic notions of computer science are still really important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I learned was working with at WPI, just hearing how the professors teach that stuff too. So I think so that might make you feel a little better. Things are coming that full circle. They're coming out of school with that mentality. They're not tagging themselves with a certain
Right,
language.
really important, really important. I
Yeah,
mean,
because it's going to change on you anyway,
yeah, it
right?
is, and that
Right.
a lot of it could go away.
Now, because of that old school thinking, do you see that in businesses too? That they actually look for certain, I think they're too narrow when they're looking for like great engineers, software engineers, because they're looking for like, have you worked in this language? Like a great engineer will figure it out. But what do you
Yeah.
think about that with that type of mentality in industry?
So it depends. In the startup world, we've always looked for raw talent. It's
Mm,
how we've been wired. And
yep.
and what happens is we get a set of people, and then we move from company to company together, and we know who the
Mm,
top people are, and then we use our co-op programs to find the best ones.
yep.
And then the big companies get guys that only know Python. Our smaller companies, we would be like, now we're just going to hire raw talent.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
then
that's the way to
and
do
they
it.
learn super fast. And you drop them in the deep end of the pool, and you see if they survive. That's more of a West Coast mentality, and that's how startups behave. It's a little different ecosystem. Not everybody's going to make it after the first year.
Yep. Yep.
I mean,
Wow.
and that's how it was actually up here when I first started. Like Digital or Data General, they'd hire 200, 300 engineers, and after a year, they'd cut 100 or 200 of them. Then
Because
you
they didn't have the mentality, the create mindset, or they just have the skills, or both.
both.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, that was, and that's what happens now in early stage companies. You either make the cut or you don't.
So for now, well, how would you coach younger people graduating right now? What kind of mentality do they have? I think you kind of hit it already, but like,
Yeah, no, we
like
hit
almost
it.
like bring it right to them. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I'd say be a great computer scientist and engineer, and don't think that your identity is wrapped up in whether or not you know Python or not. Like that you're a front end developer. Like, give me a break, right? It's to the point now using the latest tech where if you if you can imagine it, you can build it if you
Mm,
understand what's really happening. If
yep.
if you, a lot of people have a lot of great ideas and they use these tools and they get lost because nothing will ever really work because they actually don't understand what an interrupt is, what multi-threading is, what memory management is, how a
Mm,
GPU or a CPU work, how to bottleneck a CPU or not, or memory constraints or IO implications of a flash drive versus a spinning disk. Like these are architectural things. And so to make an application scale, you still got to understand how it works. Like a lot of kids think that like a Java virtual machine or a VM is a computer. And no, it's not. And now we've just elevated in vibe coding even more abstract. And if you don't understand how all these things connect down to, which are, transistors in circuits, like you're going to be in trouble. Like it's not, the tools are not going to abstract everything all the time, and it's going to keep changing.
Now, there's a couple other elements that you have down, it really well. So it came from an engineering background. So we can hit these as two individual, not together because they're two separate topics, but they all blend together. You have such unbelievable business knowledge, being a founder, selling it. That's something. Engineering is, you need to understand that, but that's a different game. Buying, selling, right? And now I want to talk about the people side of all that too,
Sure.
that you have down also. So that's another dimension that a lot of graduating computer science students don't have, those other two items.
Yeah. So if we approach it, and we'll tie this to fintech to some extent.
Yep.
If we approach it, and I'll dial it into early stage, because I would encourage more people to try to be entrepreneurs. I think that's very important in our society and our culture. We can talk more about that and implications of fintech on the backside of this. But if you look at any company, there's three fundamental things they have to do. The first is less than obvious, and it involves people, which is you need to stay alive, you need to survive. And so that means you got to have people, and to have people, you got to have capital, because capital allows you to have the people. And without capital, capital is the energy that fuels these companies. And without capital, you don't have energy. And without energy, any organism dies. So the first law is you got to stay alive, and that means capital. People, capital, and dollars. First law. Second law is what we mostly talked about, which is you need to build something. And that's where the engineering piece comes in. But there's really at least two sides to the engineering piece. There's all the engineering process and building stuff, but there's like, are you building something that's relevant to the customer, that solves a real problem, that they'll give you dollars for, that you'll, again, take away the pain. And when you take away the pain, they'll reward you. And that leads you to the last piece, which is you got to sell stuff. And so the three things about any company are you got to build things, you got to stay alive, which you got to have people resources, you got to have capital, two kinds of capital, human and financial capital. You got to build something that solves a problem, and then you got to sell it. And that's a virtuous cycle, because if you're able to stay alive and you build something and it solves a problem, then you can have money, which fuels the whole system. And each of them, without the people component, fails. And, I was just talking to one of the companies that I'm involved with, Pillar VC, that in Boston here. And every conversation I've had any day with any of these companies, the founders, the investors, the senior management, are around these three things. And I just listen, and I'm like, okay, now we're talking about number two, which is you're not building something of value, or you're not selling it, or how do you sell it? Or how do you raise capital? What is your business plan? How far did you get? How are you going to position yourself for other investors? And all of those things, people get so wrapped around the axle, around the idea and the tech, and this is Rich the engineer speaking, that they forget all the important stuff. That's not why people fail anymore. They fail because they don't get product market fit. And that's about listening to customers and understanding what's really going on. Who is your competition? What problems you're solving? What are the technology trends? Where's the market going? These are all squishy things that are not pure engineering activities. And then the whole thing about how do you sell, like that is all people, right? What is your value proposition? How do you price? How do you use partners or not? What is your go-to-market? Is it direct, indirect? Is it inside sales? High touch enterprise, what is your go-to-market? These are all, and so it takes all of those things to build a company. And frankly, where I spend most of my time is on the go-to-market and organizational things these days. I'm less interested in the tech. Yeah,
I mean, now you hit on, a a lot of times, you hear, oh, yeah, solve a problem, right? Absolutely, right? But the way you talk about it, I love the way you frame it. It's, take away the pain, which kind of goes back to what is that unmet human need?
Right.
How did you learn that? You didn't learn that in your engineering classes, or maybe you did, and you had unbelievable professors back in the day. But did you have a mentor? Did you learn it from your family? Like, how did you learn that? Like, that is first things first is what's the unmet human need that you're delivering? And that's your differentiator and that's your selling point, that it goes hand in glove, right?
Yeah, so maybe I was just fortunate. Again, my first company was in college, and I just watched it, right? I was like, I had this idea, and I could see the lines were terrible, and I'm like, shit, I'd like this myself. I don't want to go to the computing center. And then it was validated because people bought it. Like, what more do you need to know? It's like, I do this result happens. It's highly correlated. I mean, it's so this idea that you can leverage technology to build something and then take away the pain was the learning, right? And so just keep doing that. And then I realized that there was a second reinforcement of it, which was after we sold our first startup, and I was kind of just one of the engineers there. I realized that, and when I was running a consulting company, that if you're in a consulting business, you get paid for each hour. And so the disease for me was, oh shoot, I need to take multiple contracts because I want to have. But then I realized, no, the root problem is that there's only so many hours in the day. Whereas I thought back on my college experience, I thought, well, if I build a product once, then a process reproduces it. So I invest energy up front, and then a manufacturing process builds it repeatedly. So I invest once and it gets sold multiple times. Why do I want to be in the consulting business?
It's a great point. Yeah.
So that was all around the idea of take away the pain, but then manifest it not as a service, and not as a consulting service, because many things are manifested as a service now. Software is a service, right? Subscriptions are a service, right? But it's the idea that you invest in R&D once, and then there's a process that reproduces it, allows you to scale the business.
Please come back to part 2 with Rich Napolitano, as he talks about the biggest attributes and success in fintech that has nothing to do with fintech. He talks about data sovereignty, his new venture, PhotoPal, and there might be a little bit of wife bragging going on. Thank you for listening to What the Heck Fintech. Make sure you tune into our next episode as we continue to interview fintech leaders and share real-world stories from across the fintech ecosystem, so you can fully understand that fintech is fin life.